All right, guys, welcome back to the last of the four primary buttons. We are going to talk about cruise control, where I will call it speed control at certain points, but that's what we're going to talk about. Let's start at the beginning. Let's make sure we understand it for the S197, and let's make sure we understand it for the S550 before we get into the solution. So, first things first, this is the S197. The one thing I will call out, Ford got their diagram wrong. These in red are the actual resistors that are in the car itself. These were measured with a multimeter. They were not, just read off the resistors themselves. I actually measured the resistances coming out. And you can see up here, these are the actual resistances I measured. And this is the ones when I measured the individual resistors and then calculated what they should be based on the math over here. So this 301, 301, 511, 1K, 2.2K, wrong. Completely wrong. So stick with the numbers I have here in red. You'll also notice in some of the other diagrams, if you're using them, you'll see it listed and shown this way. Once again, these resistances are incorrect. These are the correct resistances. It gives us a on and off of 0, right? 0 is going to create a short that goes straight to out. Set minus is 120. Set plus is 300. Resume is going to be 601. That's your resume and cancel button together. And finally, your resting resistance is 2.1 thousand ohms, so 2100 ohms. All right, let's take a look at the S550 speed control. Now, for the S550, there are two versions of this. There is a version without adaptive cruise control, and there is a version with adaptive cruise control. I opted in my actual implementation to do the one without adaptive cruise control. However, the only difference is that there is an additional gap up and gap down set of buttons for the cruise control with adaptive cruise control, and I do have the diagram and the solve for that listed in here as well. So very similar to our Bluetooth, we don't have a simple resistance ladder. We have 3 parallel circuits which controls each set of the buttons. Now on the S550, you'll notice resume and cancel are 2 different buttons, left and right. On and off are 2 different buttons, left and right. On the S197, they're combined. On and off functions as 1 button, and resume and cancel is 1 button. So for those, we just have to make those resistances match one another when we get into the solve. But ultimately, we'll go through how it works. Once again, we have multiple levels of resistors. I have actually listed out the resistors that are integral to these, but there are some I call them jump resistors. They're zeros. They allow the circuit to rearrange how it works. Finally, you can get into the diagrams down here and I can show you, but the one thing to call out, which is interesting, if we go back very briefly, I'm going to show you guys on the S550 Bluetooth. Remember, these 2 are linked together, these 2 are linked together, and these 2 are linked together. They're vertical. They're linked together vertically. On the speed control, they're not linked together vertically. They're actually linked together by the physical button itself. So set plus and set minus are linked, resume and cancel are linked, and on and off are linked, not vertically. Okay, something to remember. Once again, the circuit wiring and traces are completely different in the speed control. I have gone through and I have mapped them out, so if you feel like sitting back and actually looking through, you can follow the traces, what pins they come in and out of, and so on and so forth. Okay, so that's the without adaptive cruise control. With adaptive cruise control, very similarly, they are linked. But notice, resume and cancel are crushed into 1 button. On and off are crushed into 1 button. This is very similar to the S197. And then you have your gap up and gap down button. This controls the distance between the car in front of you. Do you want more car space? Do you want less car space? The S197 does not have the ability, as far as I know, to manage that. So you have two options. You can disconnect it completely, or you can repurpose it so that these buttons function the exact same way as these do. So this button would function similar to resume cancel. This button would function similar to on and off. I don't recall what I decided to do, but we'll see as we go into it. I'm not going to get into the list down here, only to say when they design this, they do gap up, gap down, set plus, set minus, resume cancel. Again, this is wrong. It's the opposite. Resume cancel on and off is over here, and gap up, gap down is on this side. Not a huge deviation, but something to think about as you go into this. And I did list the resistances out here that are stock in the S550. So now we want to get into how we change it. Okay, so we'll come up here and let's take a look at on a non-adaptive cruise control circuit. Okay, guys, I learned a painful lesson going through this one. This was the hardest one for me to get to work. Do you remember how I mentioned in the last video that closing the circuit, having a resting resistance was not necessary? Well, I only tested that in the S197 on the Bluetooth and the audio switch. I didn't test it on the cruise control. And the painful lesson I learned over the course of about 2 weeks researching this and testing and not testing is your car has a difficult time coming to terms with the fact that the cruise control circuit is broken. Understandably for two reasons. One, cruise control is a function of the car moving. There is a safety aspect to making sure that your car is always keeping track of whether or not you should be in a cruise control mode. And number two, the cruise control on and off button is the only button that is a physical momentary switch that needs to act like a toggle switch. Okay, what do I mean by that? Well, what I mean is that think about your light switch. Your light switch, when you flip it on, you are physically moving it and it doesn't go back to its old position unless you move it back. So while the switch is up, the light is on. That is a static or toggle switch is what I'm going to refer to it in this video as. A momentary switch is, I'll think of a button maybe on your microwave, or a button, let's say you have one of those refrigerators with the little water where you put the cup in, and as long as you're holding it there, the water comes out. The moment you take it away, it turns off. That's a momentary switch. Well, think about your cruise control. You want to be able to press that button once, it returns to its position, but your car remains on. The cruise control remains on. That could be the other aspect of why this is required. All that is to say, what I learned is that you cannot leave it as a broken, as those resting voltages broken. You need to complete the circuit. Okay? So if I scroll down here, what you'll notice is that I do a couple things here. One, I swap in and out the resistors. Okay? And that's what you can see on the left of each side of these. So I list out what resistors are swapped out. Then what I do is I show trace wires. So where I break this, which indeed we do need to break it, I then add a trace wire to go jump to the next circuit. So my resistance ladder actually follows in a logical manner. Okay? And then finally, my last resistor that I would have broken the circuit on, I do put that final resting resistor in. So what do we have? We're going to remove R1 and replace it with 0. We're going to remove R3 and replace it with 0. We're going to remove R5 entirely. We're going to remove and replace R8 with 120. We're going to remove R10 and replace it with 180. We're going to remove R12 entirely. We're going to remove R15. Now, when it was broken, I needed to replace R15 with 601 ohms. We're going to ignore that for a second, because we're going to fix that later. This is the old instructions. We're to remove R17 and replace it with 0. That is indeed correct, because we want resume and cancel to act as one button with one set of voltage. And finally, I put here, we're going to remove R19 entirely. We're going to ignore that because we're actually going to add in a resistor to correct this. Finally, once you've made all these changes, you are going to add a trace wire from the first pad on the left of R5 to the via. The vias are the little holes to the left of R8. That's here. We're going to add a trace wire from the first pad on R12, which was here, and we're going to add that to the via before or to the left of R15. Now, if you had put in a 608 ohm resistor, you would have to remove it and add in a resistor for 300 ohms and make sure R15 ends up with 300 ohms. I've already updated this diagram. Then you're going to add a final resistor for R19 of 1500. That completes the circuit to give you a final resting resistance of 2100 ohms, which is what we talked about before. Finally, because you've broken these, but we haven't physically broken them, but because we want these traces broken, you will not connect these in the same way in the Bluetooth. If we go back, you are going to connect them outside the switch. You are not going to do that with the adaptive cruise control. You're going to leave those off, and you're only going to use 2 wires here. You're going to use pin number 4 and pin number 5 coming out of that connector. We'll talk about that later when we get into designing the harness. Okay, so what does that look like? If we were to modify the board, this is what it would look like. You would remove and replace R1 with 0, R3 with 0. That's going to make your on and off buttons work exactly the same. You are going to remove and replace R8 with 120, R10 with 180. You're going to remove R12 entirely. I forgot, remove R5 entirely. Finally, you're going to remove R15 and replace it with a 300, not a 600. You're going to remove R17 and replace it with a 0. And you're going to remove R19 and replace it with a 1500. Last but not least, you're going to add, these are those trace lines I said. The first pad on R5, you're going to attach that to the via coming before R8 to the left of R8. And then you're going to add a trace wire from the right side of R12. I think I listed that as the left side of R12. Oh, no, I did list it. The first pad, right side of R12. I think I said left. The right side of R12 to the via to the left of R15. So make sure it's on the right side because this circuit actually goes this way, not this way, left to right. It goes right to left for R12. Okay, so here is what it looks like. Here's what you're going to want to do on the actual board. And finally, if I come down here and we look at this, my wires are a little sloppy because I was just testing them out, but you'll notice here's my 0. Here's my 0 for the first circuit, the on and off. Here is my 300, which looks a little rough. Here is my 1500 over here. Finally, and I believe I replaced R17 with a 0. This is going to be my resume cancel. And then my set plus and set minus is a 120 here and a 180 here. You can see my trace wire goes from the pad on the right of R12 to the via to the left of R. Well, the via is here, but you can go to the trace pad if you find it difficult to get to that. The reason I like to use the vias is you could take the wire and actually poke it through the hole. What happened to me was I got solder on here and I couldn't get the wire through the hole, so I was out of luck with that. Finally, we have our other trace wire, which goes from the left pad of R5. And again, this isn't super clean, but it comes over here to the via to the left of R8, which is precisely here. So that is going to get your cruise control working without adaptive cruise control. Those traces are critical, guys. They're absolutely critical for making sure that this works. Otherwise, it's not going to work. You need that resting voltage to be detected by the car for it to maintain the on and off function. I've tested this in the car and it works. Okay, when it comes to adaptive cruise control, simply put, I've followed a very similar logic. However, the difference is, there's a couple differences. One, I have not translated this to an actual working, like I haven't actually done this in practice on the board because I simply haven't had time, but it should work similarly. What I decided to do was just disable the gap up and gap down. In order to do that, I'm just going to remove the resistor for R15. Now, we kind of have to jump around here because on and off comes first in the resistance ladder, then set plus, set minus, set minus, set plus, then resume cancel. So we're going to come up with a 0 ohm resistor into on and off. So we'll replace R1 with 0. Then we're going to put a trace that's going to go over to that via to the left of R8. We're going to have R8B120, R10B180. Then right after that, we're going to look for the via right after R10, or sorry, not the via, the pad, the right side pad of R12. And we're going to create another trace line and we're going to actually jump back. We're going to jump back to the, you know what? Let's take a step back. We're going to remove R3 entirely. This has to do with, we can't have continuity with on and off. So we'll remove R3 entirely. This red line is going to go, similar to the other one, from the left side of, the right side of R12 pad. And this is not going to be a trace wire. What it's going to be is, it's going to be, I call it a barrel resistor. I looked up what it actually is called yesterday and I totally forgot. But you're going to take a 300 ohm resistor and you're going to go from the right side pad of R12 and you're going to take that over to the right side pad of R3. Or you could do to the via right after that. Then you're going to replace R5 with a 1500 ohm resistor and that will complete your circuit. Once again, you're not going to connect the wire for R6 or the 6-pin connector. You're not going to, the 6-pin in the connector, you're not going to connect the wire of the 7-pin connector. You're only going to have 4 and 5. So if we scroll down here, I'm going to stop here because, again, insert image here because I haven't actually done it. But notice I remove R3 entirely. I remove and replace R1 with a 0. I am going to replace this resistor here, R5 with a 1500 ohm resistor. I'm going to remove R15 entirely. I'm going to remove R12 entirely. R8 is going to be 120. R10 is going to be 180. I'm going to add my trace from the via over here. I say do the via to the via because if you're really slick about this, you can just put the wire directly into the via hole. You can put it directly into the via hole and then just solder it right in, clip it off on the back, and it will be nice and clean instead of trying to get to this pad here. And then for this 300 ohm resistor, you're going to go directly from this via here instead of this pad all the way down here. Why? Because this pad has continuity all the way back to this via. And then you can get to this via over here, which once again has continuity across where you want to link it up to. And once again, you can put those holes on that resistor, the wire legs on the resistor right through the holes, solder them in, and it should be clean for you. So that's the cruise control button in a nutshell, guys. I know it's a little bit of a long video here, but this one actually took me quite a while to figure out why it wasn't working. And it's because for the speed control, you do need the resting resistance. All right. So if you followed me up to this point, at this point, if you are doing nothing else, you're not going to do your, you don't want a heated steering wheel. You're not going to go with the S550 clock spring because you don't need a heated steering wheel, or you want to modify your S197 clock spring. You are pretty much done. You will have modified all of the different pieces. Now you simply just need to create a harness that has the pinout for each of the different connectors, which I'll do a quick video of that next, and one set of wires that are going to go into the horn on the back of the S550 horn. So that's something to remember, is that our harness needs to have all of those connections. So you're going to have one connector going into the clock spring. You're going to have your 4 going out, one to the audio control, one to the info control, one to the Bluetooth control, one to the speed control, and one to the horn. And that should be it. Well, guys, thanks for attending. And hopefully for you guys who have been waiting for this for quite a while, you will now have a fully functional steering wheel that you can use. I hope you stick around for the rest of the project, because we have a lot more to go over as far as the wiper controls and signals go, and then finally the steering wheel. All right, guys, I will catch you in the next one. Take it easy.